hundreds of billions of dollars in investment that can come right here to these shores in the United States. The European Union, they took themselves out of the equation. They love nothing more than to regulate anything. If it's a day that ends in Y, there's a regulation that goes with it, right? And when we're talking about who's left in this race then, it's the United States and it's China. And I can tell you one thing about China when it comes to this particular topic is that they are going to do everything in their power to try to close the gap that exists between the United States and China. And we should not be going and doing things on our end to make it that much easier, right? And some of the regulatory proposals that we've seen coming out of the Senate, out of the House, out of the executive, they are doing things there that would ultimately ask our amazing innovators here in the United States to try to fight that fight to lead us into this next revolution that AI is going to bring. But do it with one hand tied behind your back, maybe take away one of your eyes for eyesight, have a leg taken out of the equation too. Let's see how cool you guys can actually make this work with as little to, utilize as humanly possible. And that's actually not helpful.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Thanks for being with us for another episode of American Potential. Artificial intelligence, or AI, we all hear that now. All of a sudden, we're hearing it the last several years. And it's become such a part of everyday life, from filtering email to helping streamline a business. But some people fear AI, and they fear that it could eliminate certain industries or get to the point that it can't be controlled, and therefore regulations need to be put in place, some say. But how should AI be regulated? The Biden administration decides to use the Defense Production Act to regulate AI, which raises concerns about government overreach and how it could interfere with innovation. Now, the Defense Production Act, which was originally intended for wartime emergencies, has been used to correct bad policy. One example is that the Biden-Harris administration has used the Defense Production Act to accelerate electric heat pump manufacturing. While there needs to be a robust discussion on how to regulate AI, using powers that are meant for wartime emergencies, that's not the best solution. So today we're going to talk about this issue with two guests. The first is Thomas Kimbrell, who is an analyst for Americans for Prosperity Foundation, and James Czerniawski, who is the senior policy analyst for Americans for Prosperity. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Good. James, let's first talk about AI and some of the ways it's already being used in our society.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. We were talking about it a little bit before we kicked this off here, but the use cases of AI are kind of incredible here. It's going to really be impacting every single industry that's out there in some rhyme or fashion, right? So I think the most exciting example that I like personally is in healthcare, where we're seeing artificial intelligence getting used to help spot cancer sooner in patients, right? And that's like improving the miss rate from 50% down to 25%. That means that we're spotting cancer that much sooner. We're able to go and get more targeted treatments, right? So that's just on the cancer side alone. Then you have on the research and development side, where AI is helping to go and research new kinds of drug combinations and help us discover new drugs faster, right? And more efficiently. Walmart and Amazon actually recently had released comments during their earnings calls that was talking about how they were using AI to go and streamline certain processes that would have taken them thousands of hours to go and integrate for things that were like low value tasks, things that, you kind of need to do, but they're not like the most important priority, right? And I think for Amazon, when they were talking about it, it saved them over 4,500 hours of software engineer time. And considering how expensive software engineers are to go and acquire for any company, that's a lot of money that the company's saving that they're able to then go and kind of reprioritize into other areas that were kind of lacking in money otherwise, right? So there's a lot of really good opportunities with artificial intelligence, and there's plenty of reasons to be excited about what's to come here, because we're really only just scratching the surface.
Yeah. Thomas, as people see or hear about AI, most people probably think about, well, it could filter your email, or they think of the smaller things, the lower applications of AI in their life. But there's some really fantastic things. I mean, what you talked about, James, about finding cancer, detecting cancer early. I mean, what do you think the average person thinks of when they think of AI?
Probably just some sort of powerful, potentially destructive force that from some superhero movie, James Bond or Mission Impossible. I think that there's a lot of fear of the unknown. Skynet version 2.0.
Yeah.
I think it scares a lot of people in government as well.
Yeah. What I think of is, what was the Star Wars scene where they had all the clone robots fighting each other? I can't remember, Attack of the Clones or something. Yeah. Like, that's what I think people think of when they think of AI. It's like, we don't even have soldiers on the battlefield anymore. It's just robots fighting each other.
You got the Terminator coming to life here, right? People definitely love pointing out that kind of an example. And Thomas mentioned Mission Impossible, right? The primary, animating force in that was an artificial intelligence enemy. So it's definitely been dramatized through Hollywood and other popularized media. Certainly our traditional media sources have gone to great lengths to go and demonize AI and trying to highlight all these existential threats that are out there. I think the most loony example that I saw was you had this letter that was signed by all the big wig names out there that was likening the risks associated with AI to nuclear war and pandemics. And I'm sorry, but those are just two very drastically different things. We know what the actual risk of a nuclear bomb going off is. We just went through a pandemic, so we're very acutely aware of what are the risks that are affiliated with that. With AI, that is a very big unknown, and you are really doing a disservice by trying to liken it to those two very, very disastrous things.
Yeah. As people don't know as much about AI. And maybe we can talk about some of the examples through history. There are other things that maybe came along. We didn't know what they were. The Industrial Revolution, I'm sure, was one of them, right? But where policymakers in particular were concerned about that particular new technology, kind of became fearful about it, wouldn't embrace it. And then, it took us a long time to adopt it. And then once we did, it really benefited society. Maybe each of you can maybe give some examples of that.
Yeah, I think a classic example that goes even earlier than the Industrial Revolution is when you think about the invention of the printing press. The Bibles used to be written by hand, and when all of a sudden the printing press was automating and basically putting out these Bibles en masse, you had the church going and freaking out about that, being like, well, no, this is very bad. But to go and spread the news about why they thought that was bad, what did? They leveraged the printing press to get it done. So, right. Very classic, funny example that I always go to when talking about the fear of technology being very overblown.
Yeah, Thomas, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most recent and obvious example would be the internet. There's you can find old clips of one quote was saying it would be no different than the fax machine, and people trying to figure out what email is, and but eventually it transformed our whole society, and it ushered in the information age.
Yeah, I mean, AI probably even has greater potential than what the internet ever had. Yes.
Absolutely, and it's building off of that infrastructure, and so I guess the internet kind of makes it possible because you have access to so much information that you can start to do this type of machine learning.
Yeah, let's talk about the definition of AI, because that's important, right? What is AI? If we define it incorrectly, and I guess who gets to define it? Is it government? Does government get to decide what AI is because they're the regulators?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the part of the issue is that it's an evolving one. What we think is AI. I think I was talking with my friend Neil Chilson not too long ago, and he was talking about a quote that he had heard that kind of stuck true to me, where he was saying that if it's something that we haven't quite worked out the kinks for yet, it's like AI, because we're constantly iterating and trying to work on it. But once we kind of solved it and mastered it, then it's just software in many respects. And I thought that was pretty insightful, because it does go and I think draw the paradigm that's kind of out there. And I think that the issue ends up being, when we're talking about getting into legislation and regulation of artificial intelligence, to your point about defining it, is that if we're not careful, all of a sudden the same kind of definition for AI that you might want, AI that's being used in, let's say, Photoshop, is getting treated the same way that AI that's powering our autonomous vehicles. I was just in Arizona last week taking a Waymo around, which was incredible. Highly recommend it. Really fun experience. But if we go and we treat those two the same, you're going to go and actually have a situation emerge where we're underdeveloping both technologies. And that's actually really unfortunate.
Yeah. So you were in Phoenix.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was there too. And we tried to find a Waymo, but it was we had to wait too long for it to get there. We didn't. So for people who may not know what Waymo is, I mean, these are self-driving automobiles, right?
Absolutely.
So tell me about your experience. I need to know your experience since I didn't get to do it.
Oh, it was so much fun.
Now, for somebody like you who loves AI, somebody else might jump in there and go, something's not right here.
Oh, yeah.
But you loved it.
No, I loved it because, as you point out, I'm a tech nerd. So whenever I go to see all the new toys, it's always just like, it's an amazing experience every time. But I can also, as a driver, like I own a Camaro, so I love driving my car too, right? So it is a little weird at the same time getting in there and like seeing the steering wheel going and turning around on its own. But Waymo is just one of the companies out there that's working on this technology. And in this case, in Arizona, they have the pilot where it can go all around the city, and you have like a Jaguar, which is actually a nice thing, coming and picking you up. And it just goes and it can follow all the stop signs. It follows all the lights, right? It can go and accelerate, change lanes, make turns. And again, it's really incredible. And what was it? I think they just released some data on this recently where they crossed like 100,000 rides, I think, per month or something with Waymo, if memory serves right on the data. And the cool thing about this too, especially when we're talking about AI in vehicles now, one of the leading causes of death in the United States are car accidents. You're talking about 40,000 deaths per year in a car accident. And those AI-driven cars, their incident rates are significantly lower than that of a human driver, right? So if we can go and have even these innovations get adopted more broadly on the margin, that's a lot of lives that we're saving because those cars are being safer than the human, right? So I think that there are really cool opportunities there if we let it go and flourish.
So I was in Phoenix last week too, as I mentioned, and somebody told me that they took a Waymo and it was going along, and there was somebody just off the side on a bike, riding a bike.
Yeah.
And the Waymo sort of took half a lane switch.
Yeah.
Didn't do the full lane switch.
Yeah.
Half a lane and then got around them, which, I mean, that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
That it can do stuff like that.
No, it truly is crazy, right? It's very cognizant and aware of that. When I was with my buddy and we were taking the Waymo out into Phoenix area proper, right? We like normally one of the issues that we have as drivers is that we'll be pretty last second when it comes to changing from yellow to red, and therefore we might accidentally get into the box a little bit. Whereas like with the Waymo, it's very cognizant of that, and it's going to stop pretty smoothly. And again, really cool ride. And again, I felt really safe in the car, right? So it was a really fascinating experience. And right now, I think like the biggest limitation is that it's only in a limited number of areas, right? You have Waymo operating in Phoenix, you have it operating in San Francisco, you have Uber doing some of these similar experiments in Austin, if memory serves right. But again, like, why does it have to be on a city by city basis? We should have all the cities trying to go and experiment with this technology, more broadly speaking.
So I was going to ask that. Why? I know the answer, but why Phoenix? Why can you only find this in select places? Because they allow it, right?
Yeah. Phoenix does allow it. And also by extension, Arizona underneath Governor Ducey was a very pro-innovation governor. And he was actually very supportive of signing in legislation that was trying to usher in autonomous vehicles into the state of Arizona. So we've seen that both on the commercial side, where we're having the consumer kind of rides. But then by extension too, we have that in the commercial context where you had autonomous trucking experiments going down in Arizona too, because again, they're just set up to be such a pro-innovation state with the things that Governor Ducey did when he was in office, that they get to go and be at the forefront leading the charge on innovation in this front. And other states should look to go and try to emulate some of those things that Governor Ducey did when he was there.
I wonder if it's like though my laptop, because you know, when my laptop starts screwing up, what's the first thing? Have you tried shutting and rebooting it? I wonder if they have to do that with the Waymo, you think?
Oh, I think so, because there was this funny story that kind of came out in San Francisco where the Waymos were all clogged up in this one area of San Francisco at 4 a.m. and they were just honking at each other. And I imagine that wasn't all that great for the residents of San Francisco, but I imagine they had to go and call up some tech guy over there at Waymo to be like, can you just turn these off and turn them back on again so they can stop honking at each other?
Reboot them.
Yeah.
Reboot them. Thomas, as you look at it, how should AI be looked at as they're defining what AI is? Any thoughts on how it should be looked at?
Yeah, I think that we need an environment within the regulatory sphere that allows for permission to innovate, or permissionless innovation. If we start placing a lot of restrictions and regulations on the technology before we've been able to realize its capabilities and realize the benefits that it has to offer, we're only hurting ourselves, and we're prolonging our ability to bring about a better world.
Yeah, and that's the concern here, right? Is that people will fear AI as they have other things in history, and therefore try and overregulate it, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Indeed. And there's going to be, there's obviously a race going on in different countries around the world to be at the forefront of this technology. And there are other places in the world that have less restrictive regulatory regimes that are pushing hard on the development of this technology.
Yeah. What's the hang up by politicians? We just recorded an episode about labor, and I would imagine there's some resistance from people who are, sort of supporters of big labor and labor unions who might be opposed to this because, it's going to replace all the workers. What are some of the things you see as the barriers that cause people want to regulate AI too much?
Yeah, I think the labor point that you mentioned is probably one of the chief concerns, and it's certainly one that we can empathize with. Certainly when we had the digital revolution for the information industrial revolution that Thomas was pointing to, we had a similar thing kind of play out where, it was an amazingly innovative technology. We had a lot of job creation, but there was also a lot of very real job losses that were impacting low to no skill workers as a result of that. With artificial intelligence, you have those same kind of concerns, but I think the funny thing is that it's not in the same kind of, class of work that's going to get impacted. Your low, no skill work, your blue collar jobs, like that's not what's at risk here. You're actually white collar workers, lawyers, like those kinds of people have a lot more risk from AI than your traditional kind of jobs that we've been thinking about, your truckers, et cetera. So we've seen labor get invited into the conversation constantly. We've seen artists kind of get involved too because of the creative aspects of this. Like when ChatGPT is giving you lyrics that might have been influenced by Taylor Swift's thing at your request, by the way, is that all of a sudden creating an issue here? You've had all these kinds of, things that are out there. And then again, you just have people that are worried about the technology. Again, when we're likening it to nuclear war and pandemics, I think that just lends itself to people wanting to go and pause AI because we're worried about like this existential risk coming to pass, even if it's like a 0.1% of happening, right? So that's caused people, I think, in Congress to go and like pump the brakes on it at times in ways that are unnecessary. And ultimately, when Thomas is talking about this race that's going on for AI, it's really important that we get it right because you're talking about 7% of global GDP over the next decade plus that is going to be attributed just to AI. It's going to double worker productivity. Here in the United States, if we don't mess it up, 1 to 2% of that 7% of global GDP will happen here. That's hundreds of billions of dollars in investment that can come right here to these shores in the United States. The European Union, they took themselves out of the equation. They love nothing more than to regulate anything. If it's a day that ends in Y, there's a regulation that goes with it, right? And when we're talking about who's left in this race, then it's the United States and it's China. And I can tell you one thing about China when it comes to this particular topic is that they are going to do everything in their power to try to close the gap that exists between the United States and China. And we should not be going and doing things on our end to make it that much easier, right? Mm-hmm. And some of the regulatory proposals that we've seen coming out of the Senate, out of the House, out of the executive, they are doing things there that would ultimately ask our amazing innovators here in the United States to try to fight that fight to lead us into this next revolution that AI is going to bring. But do it with one hand tied behind your back, maybe take away one of your eyes for eyesight, have a leg taken out of the equation too. Let's see how cool you guys can actually make this work with as little to, utilize as humanly possible. And that's actually not helpful.
Right. Thomas, let's talk about the Defense Production Act and let's talk about what it is, the Defense Production Act, and how it's supposed to be used.
Absolutely. So Congress passed the Defense Production Act in 1950 to grant the president certain emergency authorities to provide for the national defense. And originally, the national defense was defined as military preparedness and capability. Over time, that definition has expanded to include response to natural disasters, terrorist attacks, and other national emergencies. So when the president identifies, when the conditions are met and the president identifies a need to invoke the Defense Production Act, he is able to use these authorities under Title I to require producers to manufacture certain goods and to accept certain contracts in order to increase the supply. Or under Title III, he can incentivize producers to manufacture certain goods through loans and loan guarantees. And so typically this would be used to create more of a product, to increase the supply, to increase our productive capability.
Yeah. I talked in the opening about how the Biden-Harris administration has misused the Defense Production Act. What are some of the other ways that either they have misused it or it could be misused with regard to AI?
Sure. So the some things that we're seeing recently are presidents using emergency powers like the Defense Production Act as a Band-Aid to kind of mask policy failures, persisting policy failures, or to implement their own policy preferences, which undermines our constitutional system of government. So, for example, the baby formula shortage in 2022, certainly a scary situation that we need to respond to. And so President Biden invoked the Defense Production Act to ship over formula from Europe to shore up that shortage. But the problem is that there were existing regulations that underlie that shortage that restrict the supply that our domestic producers can make and make it hard to bring in baby formula from Europe. So when you use the DPA in that way to mask a persisting policy problem, then you're just treating the symptoms and not the root cause.
What's their reasoning? What's the administration's reasoning for using the Defense Production Act against AI?
I think that it was a tool that they saw in their toolbox, you know, and they thought, we can use this. It allows for swift action instead of having to convince the people's elected representatives in Congress to act. And I think it's a lot of fear of the unknown because AI is likely to change the way that we communicate with each other and with the way that we create content, the way that we consume news. And it's going to affect all areas of the economy, including the political.
Our companies will have to react and adjust to this, right? The way that the government is using Defense Production Act as it relates to AI.
Yeah,
right?
You're absolutely right. And I mean, we've talked to many companies at different events, since the months passed from that executive order getting signed in, and obviously they're doing what they can to go and comply with the executive order that President Biden put in place. Because again, they don't want to go and deal with the added regulatory scrutiny that comes with standing up to the government. That's not very easy for companies to go and do. So unsurprisingly, they're going to do what they can to comply. But Americans for Prosperity Foundation, we have that ongoing FOIA lawsuit against the administration, trying to better understand what is your justification for doing this? Because as Thomas said, we're not in an emergency when it comes to AI. Let's not pretend that there's some kind of global disaster that's ongoing that you can all of a sudden go and wrap an entire emerging industry whole swath in red tape, which is what this executive order does here, right? But companies are going to do what they can to go and comply, and then we're doing our part to hold them accountable as a civil society organization that engages in all this kind of stuff. Because again, it's just wild. It's never been used in this kind of a way before. So Thomas and I wrote about that in The Hill back in October, and that actually I think was incredible because we saw the Attorney General Sean Reyes from Utah go and send a similar letter to Gina Raimondo because he was worried about the impact of all of a sudden the federal government coming in and putting this top-down mandate on this entire industry here, and what are the secondary impacts that could have on companies that are operating in a state like Utah or in other spots, right? Where we've seen this administration pressure companies into doing particularly favored courses of action. That's the biggest threat that comes out of this executive order here, is that it was a power grab for the executive. They were going to say, we're going to go and circumvent Congress here and regulate this industry, and we're going to force them to play ball with us. Which means that all of a sudden now, if you're worried about, political wish list items getting into the equation here, that's really what ends up happening when the executive gets to have that unilateral control that's being afforded by the executive order.
Yeah. So that's the real danger here. What are the dangers of them doing this? It's special interests benefiting, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. So you have
lack of innovation.
Yeah. The big threat that you have is that you got special interests coming in. You have completely unrelated things to that underlying mission of advancing innovation in the United States coming in. Like, I don't think that you want to go and put in equity agenda items into advancing innovation in artificial intelligence. I don't think that we need to worry about, some of those discrimination questions that they might have. Those are valid insofar as that we want to certainly not have something that's there, but let's not pretend that there aren't existing rules that go and cover this, right? People are treating AI like it's the Wild West. But if I'm an employer and I'm using AI to discriminate against you for hiring in a job, right, in a positive or negative way, right? That's a violation of the Civil Rights Act for somebody else. And you can already bring an existing claim for somebody against that, right? So I think that those are the kinds of risks that we're talking about, is unrelated things getting kind of of slipped in there. And then that goes and undermines our investment in AI in the long run. Even though the United States is leading the world on that front, it can go and slow down. And we saw this kind of play out a little bit with the net neutrality debates, to go and like kind of give you a similar example, where when you put net neutrality onto the internet industry, more broadly speaking, you saw investment kind of slow down a little bit more in those years. And then when it got repealed underneath the previous administration, all of a sudden you saw investment go and open right back up, right? So those are the kinds of risks that you can see come in when the executive starts clamping down with this top-down, one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah.
And to James' point, where is the emergency? What is the end game of using these emergency powers to regulate AI? Because AI is here to stay. It's not going away, and it's only going to integrate further into our society. So if you declare artificial intelligence an emergency, you're fabricating a never-ending emergency, a perpetual emergency where the president, whoever the president may be, can use these emergency powers to really regulate the economy in ways that were not constitutionally envisioned.
Yeah. So I'd love to get at what is behind this. What is behind their thinking? Is it truly just a power grab on the part of the executive branch, which we see happen all the time, right? Or is there something else? Is it concern about labor? What do each of you think that is?
Yeah, again, I do think that the power grab is something that's impossible to ignore.
The article, for the executive branch, grabbing
power grab
power
for the executive branch is certainly something that they want to do. If you're waiting for Congress has certainly been slow to go and act on a number of issues here. And you do want to go and have some general clarity as to what AI might need to look like in the United States. But if that's going to happen from somewhere, it should be coming from Congress. And we've had people going and looking to put forward different proposals on that front. Some are better than others. They all have their own issues, and we'll go and have that conversation in Congress. But that's where it belongs, not with the executive, where it's a power grab. And then to your point about the special interests, I think that once people saw that the executive was stepping out and trying to lead in this respect, then you saw those other special interests coming in. You saw the artists, you saw labor, you saw the other civil society organizations coming in that had their pet project that they wanted to go and see tailored into this AI efforts that the administration is doing, more broadly speaking.
Right. Thomas, any thoughts?
Yeah, there's certainly legitimate concerns. This will be a disruptive technology from labor to speech. But declaring an emergency and applying these emergency authorities over the technology isn't the right way to go about addressing those concerns.
Yeah.
In the long run.
Right. So when you look at the dangers of using the Defense Production Act, what are the dangers? I mean, obviously, if they use it for AI, they can use it for anything, right? I mean,
absolutely. They have to be able to tie it back to the statute, right? To meet the conditions in the statute. But in this case, they're really stretching those, and so they can keep seeing how far that they can push that. Now, Title VII does allow the president to obtain information from companies, but traditionally, historically, this has been used to survey companies about the domestic supply and production capability, domestic production capability of a certain good, to decide whether or not we need to require or incentivize increased production of that good. Now, this order kind of turns that on its head, because the information that's being requested here, requiring that safety test results be reported, extensive reporting requirements, are not going to really serve to increase the proliferation of AI. It's going to restrict the development of AI.
Yeah. So we talked about Congress maybe taking a more active role. That's always something I think we want to happen, because that's the branch closest to the people, right? And the most accountable to the people. What are some of the things Congress could do to help maybe pull back some of this from the executive branch, but reasonable regulation of AI?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's one where, again, we're having that conversation with different members. Representative Obernolte out of California is My God, that guy is really smart on this. I mean, he actually has a degree focused on this particular issue. So it's really fascinating listening to him go and talk. And he had a great back and forth kind of challenging Secretary Raimondo on her use of the Defense Production Act here. So he certainly is going to be one to watch in terms of what congressional solutions might look like. I'll tell you like what some of the more alarming things we've seen coming out of Congress is we saw coming out of Senate rules back in May, Senator Klobuchar introduced and marked up some series of bills that were concerning AI and elections, and that would have been really bad because it was basically slapping artificial intelligence onto existing issues around donor disclosure and election stuff more broadly speaking, and the implications there would have been undermining the development of artificial intelligence products more broadly, where you wouldn't be incentivized to want to use that maybe in a political ad or any kind of issue ad, or because of how broad the application of the bill was, it would have even applied to if you used AI generated content in general about a particular candidate. So that would have implicated people's civil liberties in terms of your First Amendment rights. So that was something that was really alarming that we saw coming out from Senator Klobuchar over there. And she's gung-ho trying to go and push that. We saw the FCC trying to go and mimic something similar. They have an open notice of proposed rulemaking that's trying to tackle this. When we're saying like, what are the opportunities that Congress can look for? I think for the government, it's really more about how can we get out of the way and how can we go and streamline and facilitate, good foundational research into artificial intelligence? What are the opportunities that are there? Because when we're talking about private sector research and development and all that investment, it's really good. And like I said before, the United States leads the way on that, right? But their research and development are focused on much different kind of issues and problems than perhaps like some of those fundamental questions that we might want to look at. So when Thomas was talking about the internet and how fundamental that was to transforming our society, right? That was actually done in part through government funding, right? So there's actually something to be said about government going and funding research towards like these moonshot initiative types of things. And the same could be said for AI here, where maybe there is something where the government can go and do that. And then the argument's more about like, what's the actual number that you're going to attach to that research in terms of value? So we think that like there's some stuff there. But I think when we're looking forward, it's really more just being patient and letting the dust settle, because we actually, like I said before, people are treating it like AI is the Wild West. Reality is that AI is just a tool, and we have a lot of existing laws that go and apply there. So let's go and let case law develop. Let's see where there's gaps where when you're bringing a lawsuit forward, somehow it's failing in court for whatever reason. And then, and only then, should you then start looking at legislative and regulatory proposals that might want to go and address that gap, right? So I think like one common one that we saw that was pretty simple that percolated through the states this year was around child pornography and AI generated imagery around that, right? Like that's very simple, straightforward. Let's go and update the rules, go and cover that kind of stuff, right? So those are like little things that we can do, but we want to avoid anything that would be so massive, so big, and then trying to define artificial intelligence so broadly that it's going to go and capture different use cases that have different risk profiles.
So trying to not overregulate right now, let the market develop, fill in the gaps where we may see some obvious gaps, but not go in with a heavy hand and regulate. Is that the idea?
That's critical, especially like going back to our conversation before. We're in a race to go and be the leaders here. We thankfully are the leaders right now, but we should not take that status as a permanent thing. We shouldn't take it for guarantee, and we should go and do everything that we can to support, not stifle artificial intelligence, because China, they are running right up behind us. We have that gap, but let's not make it any easier for them by going and putting heavy-handed regulations on artificial intelligence.
I'll ask this question. I'll start with you, Thomas. The Loper-Bright decision that was handed down that basically takes some of the authority away from the executive branch. Could that be used in this Defense Production Act situation? Has anybody thought about that and whether that would apply here?
Well, I think that would require Congress to act. So there hasn't,
or someone to maybe file a lawsuit against the administration and say you don't have the authority to do it.
Correct. But in the Loper situation, it's about agency interpretation of statutory law. And I don't know if there hasn't really been any extensive statutory, Congress hasn't passed any acts yet. So when Congress does act, it will affect how the agencies implement those laws, because they'll know that we're living in the post-Loper world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of my colleagues, Adam Thier, one of my friends rather, I should say, Adam Thier over at the R Street Institute, kind of like highlighted some of this, where I think he's a little bit more sour on like what Loper is going to mean for AI in this sense, because the administrative state, I think it's a fun little thing where it's like a game of cat and mouse. You go and you take away one rule, and then they're going to go and try to figure out a way of doing the same thing through a different instrument. So even in the event where you have a massive victory like what happened in Loper, I think what Adam was kind of highlighting was that you might see agencies avoid like formal rulemaking or something and go through more guidance, soft law approaches in this sense, where they might be able to avoid some degree of scrutiny. And while I might wish that companies might want to go and bring lawsuits against the agencies or the executive for doing this kind of stuff, kind of like what I was mentioning before, I do think that because there are political considerations and other things for them, companies are just reticent to go and challenge the government because that's the same people that they're trying to work with on other issues that they care about as a business, right? So that's where you have like this weird dichotomy that they're trying to go and balance on their side. But, you know, depending on how far they go with some of this stuff, it wouldn't be surprising that, you know, a company brings a lawsuit. So what I would say is that there's actually probably a good example of a lawsuit that might come out of this if California goes and passes one of its artificial intelligence pieces of legislation that it's considering, which is SB 1047. What it would go and do to apply to the AI, industry more broadly speaking is really onerous, right? So you've had Mark Andreessen and A16Z going and weighing in on that bill, going and saying how bad it is, right? So and a bunch of other people, the Abundance Institute folks have gone and highlighted this extensively. We've had Dean Ball over at Mercatus going and highlighting the issues with that particular piece of legislation. So should that pass California and get signed into law by the governor, I wouldn't be surprised if that piece of legislation did ultimately get some kind of legal challenge in the courts. So that's the one that's actually most primed for legal challenge right now, if it passes.
What, I guess, final question is, I asked at the beginning, what do people think of AI as? Generally, what does an American think of it? What does it mean? What should Americans think about AI moving forward? Like if you could think of this is how we should look at AI, what should that be? We'll start here.
Yeah, I think what Americans should look at AI as is it's a compliment, right? It's meant to make your life easier. It's going to help with your travel arrangements. It's going to help you navigate food allergies. It's going to help, like I said, on the health front. It's literally just meant to go and help make you be better at all the things that you want to do. We think about in the healthcare scene, which is so expensive. I was just talking to our colleague Dean about this yesterday, but it's like when you have a problem on the labor side because people are getting burned out from dealing with all the paperwork that is required in the healthcare system. If AI can go and help streamline that for you, right? Now you get to go and focus on the thing that made you want to be a nurse, that made you want to be a doctor, caring for people, treating them, helping them, right? So AI is a massive opportunity that we should be seizing. That's how Americans should look at it. It is the next great frontier for us to go and kind of, I think, realize our fullest potential in all the work and things that we're doing in our daily lives.
Mm-hmm. I would echo James' sentiments that AI is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for a better future. And another opportunity that is coming up is the Defense Production Act authorities are actually set to expire in 2025 unless Congress reauthorizes them. And so I think that would be a great opportunity for Congress to take a look at the current state of the Defense Production Act and see about adding some measures for transparency and accountability. Currently, if when the president invokes the DPA, there's not much transparency or accountability. So there's measures that could be added, like adding to a agency website that's been delegated DPA authority, a specific page dedicated to the actions that they're taking under DPA authorities, like commerce.gov/DPA. Currently, when the president invokes the DPA, it's active until the president revokes it. And so that provides little opportunity for congressional oversight of the use of those powers. So putting a sunset on that, maybe 6 months to a year after the DPA authorities are invoked, they sunset unless Congress reauthorizes them. So that could give more power, bring balance back to our constitutional system of checks and balances instead of empowering one branch to take advantage of emergency powers to implement their personal policy preferences or cover up persisting policy problems.
Okay, final question. Since I walk around the office here, and I never get the door right, am I supposed to push it or pull it? You know what I'm talking about, the glass doors?
Yeah.
Could we use AI to teach, either to teach me or to do it for me? So what do you guys think?
Yeah. Actually, when you go through the Sky Bridge here, right, you already have the sensors that just open it for you. So if you could just implement that through the entire building, that'd be fantastic. Actually.
Do you have the same problem I do? I never get it right. I push.
Yeah.
And I still don't know if it's push or pull. Is it push or pull?
Yeah, it depends, right? And like the funnier thing is like with all these doors being glass in our office, like I'm just waiting for the day that somebody goes and pulls on a push or something and just the whole thing shatters.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It will happen.
Yeah, it's going to happen eventually.
And then we'll have an AI something come in and fix the glass.
It up, the little AI robot.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. All right. Well, listen, this is another example of how government can make bad decisions, overregulate an industry, and stop innovation and frankly, advancement of our society. And so we've got to be very careful. What a great idea. Like, kind of do no harm. Government should do no harm until we figure out, this whole brand new technology and the best way for our society to utilize it. And this is an opportunity for America to lead the world in the innovation in artificial intelligence. Hey, thanks for being with us. Thanks for joining us. Get out there, defend liberty and freedom. Don't take it for granted. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.